Amphibians are some of the strangest animals on this planet, and they have many skills and abilities that are hard to comprehend. They are able to absorb toxins and become toxic themselves, and they can even regrow lost limbs and parts of their brains. Unfortunately, many amphibians are in real peril today, as they are the most threatened class of vertebrates, with nearly 41% of all amphibian species being threatened with extinction. The reason behind this dramatic loss of amphibians is mostly human related, but they are also suffering from diseases and parasitic fungus. It's important that we admire the species that we still have, and hopefully in the near future experts will find a way to battle the threats that the world's amphibians are facing, and we won't have to worry about them disappearing for good. In today's video, I'll be focusing on some of the weirdest and most distinctive amphibians in the world, as I'll be ranking each of the 7 continents by their largest amphibian. I'll be ranking these creatures based on their maximum weight, as of course some amphibians are long and slender, and others are thick and blob-like. Without further ado, we can travel over to our first continent, and I doubt anyone will be surprised by which continent comes in at number 7. Antarctica has no native terrestrial mammals, reptiles or amphibians, so once again they come in at a disappointing last place in this video. It's simply too cold for amphibians to thrive here, and this is despite the fact that some amphibians can deal with the cold a lot better than we can. Quite a few different species of reptiles and amphibians can totally freeze before thawing and coming back to life, and few species do it better than the Siberian salamander. They can survive deep freezes with temperatures dipping below -45 degrees Celsius, and they have been known to freeze for years in permafrost before thawing and walking away. If you go back over 200 million years, there were over 2-meter giant amphibians that would roam across Antarctica's wetlands, but unfortunately these creatures perished a long time ago. For this reason, Antarctica slots in at number 7, but I'm sure that you saw this coming before you clicked on the video. Oceania is known for its unique, weird and wonderful creatures, and even though it's home to a wide range of endemic amphibians, they tend to be smaller than the amphibians from other continents. What they lack in size, they make up for in quirkiness, as there are quite a few frogs in Oceania that really stand out. Australia is mostly dominated by frogs, with around 230 different species being found here, with around 93% of them being endemic. The turtle frogs are arguably the strangest looking frogs in the world, and the Brave Wilderness team managed to find one of these creatures and film it in December of 2023. The crucifix toad may win the award for the cutest and best shaped frog in the world, as it usually resembles a small ball or cube, and they seem to have a clueless or mortified expression. These tiny frogs may be cute, but they don't win the award for the best named frog in Australia, because this award would go to the giant pobblebonk frog, or the dumpy tree frog. The pouched frog keeps the Australian tradition of keeping your young in some kind of pouch, as it has pockets on its hips where it can carry its tadpoles. This tadpole carrying behaviour isn't unique to the pouched frog, as there are a few other species that have similar techniques, and there are some other more disturbing tadpole related behaviours that we'll get to a little later on in the video. The magnificent tree frog lives up to its name, and it seems to be wearing a fancy hat which only adds to its magnificent appearance. This hat is actually part of their bodies, and it contains toxins that are useful for stopping snakes from eating them. Most of Australia's frogs are usually greenish coloured tree frogs, but there are a few striking species that really stand out and tell potential predators that they're not to be messed with. Unfortunately, Australia also has a few invasive amphibians such as the smooth newt and the cane toad that threaten native species, with the cane toad being one of the most infamous invasive species in the world. This amphibian was introduced to control pest numbers on sugarcane plantations, but they have caused a massive decline in native predator populations, as their toxins can kill most reptiles and mammals that choose to eat them. Today it's estimated that there are around 200 million cane toads in Australia, and currently they are almost impossible to control. Oceania is made up of many different island nations of different sizes, but some of these island nations have no native amphibians at all, or their amphibian species are relatively small. New Guinea is home to a few species that are very similar in size to the largest amphibians in Australia, and these species are usually closely related to the Australian species. Unfortunately, the final part of this section is a bit of an anticlimax, because the largest amphibians in Oceania all reach a similar size. The title is still disputed, but it's believed that the white-lipped tree frog is the largest, with a max weight of around 70 grams, and a total body length of around 15 centimeters. These Kermit-looking frogs mean that Oceania slots in at number 6, and for our next section we'll be heading over to the other side of the world. The amphibians of Europe can mostly be split into 4 different groups: frogs, newts, toads, and salamanders. Because Europe is connected to Asia, they share many different amphibian species, but there are quite a few endemic species here too. Along some forest streams you can find striking salamanders such as fire salamanders and Lycian salamanders, but in some darker, colder places there is no need for colour at all. The olm is a fully aquatic salamander that can be found in the caves on the coast of the northeastern Adriatic, and because it has no need for eyes, it is completely blind. Its other senses, such as its hearing and smell, are heightened, and it uses these senses to help it feed on small crustaceans and snails. It does have a black subspecies which is darker and has more developed eyes, and this could be a result of living in a habitat with more light. In some caves where light is dim but still present, you can find long, slender cave salamanders, and most of these creatures have evolved large eyes to help them spot prey in low light conditions. Above ground there is a wide variety of different salamanders in the form of newts, and these creatures have a few different techniques to avoid predation. Most newts are toxic, and they do their best to tell predators this by being very colourful, and this is called aposematic coloration, and it's designed to make them stand out and look dangerous instead of blending in. The Iberian ribbed newt has a rather extreme way to protect itself from predators, as it has some useful weapons hidden within its body. When they are attacked by a predator, this newt will push its sharp ribs through the sides of its body, and this can stop the predator from swallowing it or even injure the attacker. The great crested newt has a wide range across northern and central Europe, and it's named after the crests on the breeding males. They typically inhabit heavily vegetated waters, and because of their relatively large size, they usually dominate other newts in their ecosystem. Just like Australia, Europe is home to a wide variety of frogs, but the frogs in Europe are nowhere near as colourful. Most of the frogs are a brown or green colour, and this is because they heavily rely on camouflage to avoid predators such as grass snakes. There are a few different tree frog species that can be found here, but because of the cold climate they are able to freeze and thaw. Because the frogs in Europe aren't as large as some of the others around the world, this means that they could easily be dominated by outside invaders. This is exactly what's been happening in some parts of the continent, as the American bullfrog has started to take over and dominate the native species. These frogs were introduced as pets and as a food item, but once they make it into the wild, there's almost nothing that can be done to stop them. As long as they can avoid some larger native predators, then they have nothing to fear, and they have proven to be very hard to control. There are a few different funky-looking toads on the continent, but strangely the most boring-looking toad is the largest amphibian in Europe. The European toad can be found in parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa, and it's known for its adaptability. It can be found in a wide range of habitats, including drier areas away from water sources. This ability to live away from water means that they are able to take advantage of some habitats that other amphibians cannot, and it's currently the 4th most common amphibian in Europe. The European toad can reach a maximum length of around 18 centimeters, and it can reach a maximum weight of around 90 grams. This might not seem very impressive compared to other places around the world, but it slots Europe in at number 5. North America seems to have an almost endless list of weird and wonderful salamanders, with over 300 species being found on the continent. Many of these species are known for their beautiful coloration, which is rarely matched by other animal groups, and some are known to interbreed with one another. Like Europe, it has a few aquatic blind cave salamanders, and there are some snake-like salamanders that live above ground in wetlands in the southeastern US. There are similarly looking aquatic salamanders that are given the endearing names of water dogs and mud puppies, but these creatures are usually much smaller than the amphiumas, which can measure over a metre long. In Canada, you can also find some hardy species that have the ability to freeze and thaw, and on the western coast of Canada and the US, you can find one of the most toxic amphibians in North America. The rough-skinned newt is highly toxic, and it's even claimed the lives of some humans. In 1979, a 29-year-old man from Oregon decided to ingest one of these creatures, and later he paid the price with his life. Further south in Mexico, you can find one of the most loved and adored amphibians in the world, but it's possible that they may have already disappeared in the wild altogether. Axolotls were once only found in one lake in Mexico City, but today they can be found in the homes of millions around the world. They may be one of the few animals that only exist in captivity, as there are only an estimated 50 to 1,000 left in the wild, but they are rarely, if ever, spotted in their natural habitat. Their demise is all down to pollution, habitat loss, and invasive species, as many predatory fish have been introduced into their habitat over the years. They are true masters of regeneration, and they are often studied by scientists because of their ability to regrow limbs, parts of their spinal cord, and even their brains and hearts. The largest amphibian in North America can look very similar to the axolotl in the early stages of their lives, but when they mature, they grow much larger. The hellbender is a giant salamander that's endemic to the United States, and they are typically found in fast-flowing, well-oxygenated streams. In the wild, they can live up to 50 years old, and during their lifetimes, they rarely move from their favourite spots. They have a territory less than a square mile, and individuals are often found under the same rock year after year. Unfortunately, today the hellbender is listed as vulnerable, as they are very sensitive to changes in their environment. Like many other amphibians, they are known as an indicator species, because they can only be found in fresh, clean, unpolluted waters. Their presence is an indicator that the ecosystem is healthy, and they soon perish in polluted waters as they breathe through their skin. In the wild, they mostly target small fish, crustaceans, and worms, and this protein-rich diet helps them to reach some pretty impressive sizes. The hellbender reaches a maximum length of around 75 centimeters, and they can weigh in at around 2.5 kilograms. This means that the hellbender and North America slot in at number 4, and for our next section we'll be heading south. South America is the continent with the most amphibian species, with Brazil having over 1,000 species on its own. The amphibians in this region are known for their toxicity and their striking looks, and this is definitely the case for the many species of poison dart frogs. There are over 170 different species of dart frog, and they are among the most colourful creatures in the world. Their aposematic coloration can differ greatly from species to species, and we are still discovering new dart frogs to this day. The most toxic member of this family is the golden poison frog, with their toxins being so deadly that one frog could kill around 10 to 20 men. Poison dart frogs get their toxins through the beetles and other insects that they eat, and this means that captive specimens that are fed fruit flies are not toxic at all. Like North America, South America is also home to a few different worm-like amphibians that are rarely seen, but believe it or not, they are not the strangest amphibians on the continent. The South American horned frogs go by the common name of Pac-Man frogs, and this is because their heads make up the majority of their bodies, and they possess giant Pac-Man-like mouths. They spend the majority of their lives waiting for prey to walk by, and they will feed on pretty much anything that will fit into their cavernous mouths. Brazil is home to one of the only vegetarian frogs that mostly feeds on fruits, and it's also home to a venomous frog that headbutts its victims with its spiked skull. There's one South American toad that haunts the nightmares of many innocent people around the world, and this is all because of the way that it looks after its young. The Suriname toad looks like a toad that's been run over by a truck, but its shape and coloration helps it to blend into its environment. After mating, eggs from the female are transferred onto her back, and they are eventually absorbed into the skin. After a while, the eggs sink deeper and deeper, and eventually the young hatch and escape through holes on the female's back. This seems to trigger a guttural reaction in most people, but it's still fascinating nonetheless. The smoky tree frog is one of the largest species that can be found on the forest floor, but these frogs are dwarfed by some of the species that can be found in the large lakes of Chile. The helmeted water toad is a rare giant frog that can be both brown and green in colour, and they are distant relatives of the long-extinct Antarctican amphibians. They are known for being quite aggressive, and they will feed on pretty much anything that they can fit into their mouths, and this includes their own kind. This voracious appetite is one of the main reasons why they are the largest amphibian in South America, with a max length of around 35 centimeters and a maximum weight of around 3 kilograms. The helmeted water toad and South America are fit for number 3 on this list, and next up we'll be heading over to the land of the giant mammals. Africa's amphibians may not be the largest in the world, but they are definitely some of the strangest. The hairy frog or horror frog is famous for its hair-like structures on the breeding males, but apart from this they are pretty normal frogs. The desert rain frog, like the crucifix toad, is loved because of its adorable appearance and body shape, and their high-pitched squeak only adds to their cuteness. Madagascar is home to many endemic animals that fascinate many of us around the world, so it only makes sense that some pretty extraordinary amphibians can also be found here. The aptly named tomato frog looks exactly how you'd expect, and it has a few colourful frogs that look very similar to the poison dart frogs of South America. Back on the mainland you can find some of the heftiest bullfrogs in the world, and most small creatures do their best to avoid them. The African bullfrog can weigh almost 1.5 kilograms, and they are known for their aggression and their fights during the mating season. They are one of the few species of frogs that have teeth, and they mostly use these for fighting as they swallow their prey whole. Further north, near the waterfalls of Equatorial Guinea and Cameroon, you can find the largest frog in the world, but despite their size, they are quite hard to track down. The Goliath frog is found over a very small region of Africa, and it's currently listed as endangered. In the wild, they are hunted as a food source, and they are also illegally collected for the pet trade. Very few people would have the space and resources needed to ethically keep one of these giants, but as they're from a relatively poor area, you can understand the motivation of the local people. Like most amphibians, they will feed on the majority of creatures that they can fit into their mouths, but this species also feeds on plant matter. In the wild, they can live up to 15 years, and over their lifetime they can reach some pretty impressive sizes. The Goliath frog can reach a maximum weight of around 3.3 kilograms, and they reach a maximum length of around 35 centimeters. This means that Africa slots in at a respectable number 2, but the Goliath frog is still dwarfed by the largest group of amphibians in the world. Asia is home to many frogs with interesting abilities, and some of them were only discovered relatively recently. Wallace's flying frog can be found in Indonesia, and as you might be able to guess by its name, it's able to glide using the large webbing between its fingers and toes. The purple frog looks more like a little forest gremlin than a frog, and it was only first described in 2003. This is because they spend the vast majority of their lives underground, only surfacing during the monsoon. The Indian bullfrog may not be as aggressive or intimidating as the African bullfrog, but they make up for this with their colour. During the mating season, the males are a bright yellow or green colour, and this contrasts greatly with the bright blue on the sacs on their necks. Even though these frogs are relatively large, they could still fall prey to the largest amphibians in Asia if they met, as some of them are as long as a man is tall. There are a few different species of giant Asian salamander, with the Japanese giant salamander being one of the most recognizable. The Japanese giant salamander can be found on Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, and in their freshwater habitats they fear no predator. They seem to prefer clear, fast-moving streams, and in these waters they hunt fish, crustaceans, and other amphibians. They are mostly nocturnal, and they play an important role in Japanese culture and folklore, inspiring many legends and stories over the years. In China, you can find some of its closest relatives, with the South China giant salamander being the largest. These giants are the true largest amphibians in the world, reaching a maximum weight of around 60 kilograms and a maximum length of around 1.8 meters. Unfortunately, images and footage of these creatures are very hard to come by, as they are currently listed as critically endangered, and some believe that they are extinct in the wild. Unfortunately, like many of the other giant salamanders, they are used in traditional Chinese medicine, and they have been criminally overharvested over the years. Even though they are the largest amphibians in the world, their story is still a sad one, and hopefully the other giant salamanders will not meet the same fate. Because there are so many interesting amphibians around the world, it was impossible to include them all. But if you think there are any that I should have included, then let me know down in the comments below. But for now, thanks for watching, and until next time, goodbye.